Good afternoon, everyone. This is the Metropolitan Council and our council meeting on March 9th, 2022. This is Charlie Zelli, Chair, and I need to remind everyone that we're continuing our virtual meetings for the time being, like today. So we will take a roll call for our items, but also if you're from the public and watching this meeting, we encourage you to make any comments you'd like through our email at public.info@metc.state.mn.us, and we'll respond promptly. So in order to establish a quorum, we will now ask Liz to call the roll.
Councilmember Barber.
Here.
Chambliss.
Here.
Cummings.
Here.
Fredson.
Here.
Gonzalez.
Here.
Johnson.
Here.
Lee.
Here.
Villagren.
Here.
Lindstrom.
Here.
Musset.
Here.
Pacheco. Sterner. Vento. Wolf.
Here.
Zurin.
Present.
And Chair Zelli.
I'm here. We have a quorum. And first up is to approve the agenda. No vote is necessary unless anyone would like to amend the agenda, which has been set out. We have a number of business items and a information item. Hearing no comments, I will determine the agenda is approved, which brings us to the minutes from our meeting on February 23rd, 2022. Can I have a motion to approve the February 23rd minutes?
So moved.
Thank
Second
you.
by Lee.
Thank you, Councilmember Lindstrom and Lee. Any discussion? All right, hearing none. Liz, please call the roll.
Barber.
Aye.
Chambliss.
Aye.
Cummings.
Aye.
Fredson.
Aye.
Gonzalez.
Aye.
Johnson.
Aye.
Lee.
Aye.
Lilligren.
Aye.
Lindstrom.
Aye.
Musset.
Aye.
Sterner. Vento.
Aye.
Wolf.
Aye.
Zurin.
Aye.
And Chair Zelli.
Aye, the minutes are approved. And now we're at the time that we welcome public comment. We ask that people pre-register, and no one has registered for today's comment period. But if you are in the public and you would like to make comments in a future meeting, please email us at public.info@metc.state.mn.us, and you can always send us comments by email. Which brings us to the consent agenda. May I have a motion and a second to approve the consent agenda?
So moved by Gonzalez.
Thank you,
Wolf
Councilmember
seconds.
Gonzalez. Thank you, Councilmember Wolf. Any discussion? All right. Hearing none. Liz, please call the roll.
Barber.
Aye.
Chambliss.
Aye.
Cummings.
Aye.
Hudson.
Aye.
Gonzalez.
Aye.
Johnson.
Aye.
Lee.
Aye.
Lilligren.
Aye.
Lindstrom,
Aye.
Musset,
Aye.
Vento,
Aye.
Wolf,
Aye.
Zurin,
Aye.
and Chair Zelli.
Aye. That motion carried. On to our standing committees, and we have a report from the Community Development Committee. Councilmember Lilligren.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair and council members. The Community Development Committee brings one item forward for your consideration. It is business item 2022-50. And it's to approve the 2022 Livable Communities Fund Distribution Plan. As you know, each year the council develops and approves a fund distribution plan for the Livable Communities grant programs. In total, the funding availability recommended for 2022 Livable Communities account programs is $23 million. This includes $5.5 million for tax-based revitalization account grants, $3.5 million for local housing incentive account grants, $9 million for Livable Communities Demonstration Account grants, $5 million for Livable Communities Demonstration Account Transit-Oriented Development grants, and $2 million for Livable Communities Demonstration Account and Transit-Oriented Development pre-development grants. Changes to the program criteria and scoring guidelines reflect an local housing incentive account pilot program for affordable home ownership opportunities, support for affordable housing preservation programs, and changes to equity criteria to clarify and to expand opportunities to achieve equity points. Mr. Chair, I move that the Metropolitan Council approve the 2022 Livable Communities Fund Distribution Plan as shown in attachment 1 of the staff report.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second by Councilmember Chambliss.
Thank you, Councilmember Chambliss. Any discussion? Councilmember Barber.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I actually just have a question. Overall, I noticed in the committee notes that there were some questions and concerns raised by Metro Cities and also by Councilmember Wolf. And one of the things with these programs is it's very important that it allows for all of the cities in our region to be able to be competitive for these projects. And so I'd like to, potentially either hear from maybe both Councilmember Lilligren and Councilmember Wolf, just to kind of get an understanding what impact this might have on some of the programs and how it could impact some of the cities included in the region, including in some of the outer districts.
Sure, go ahead. Maybe Councilmember Wolf, did you want to kind of elucidate, and maybe Councilmember Lilligren can give some insight?
I can do that, Mr. Chair. I had concerns about the nature of some of the equity points that go into the scoring. There are things in there like having DBE policies in purchasing for cities where a lot of the smaller cities in the outer parts of the metro try to shop local and don't have a DBE policy. And I think that it kind of putting that into the scoring for the projects has nothing to do with the project itself and is trying to get cities to do something different with their other purchases, which I don't think there's anything wrong with buying local in your local community for your supplies. There's some other aspects of that as well that are more of a partisan nature on how the city operates rather than the project. And it concerns me that maybe we lose some goodwill with the legislature in terms of getting authorization to increase our funding amounts and whatnot if we are putting partisan scoring into the projects. And it also has a minimum equity score. So if the cities don't do these things, they risk not being able to get funded at all, even if they're not the ones that are actually doing the project. In some of the smaller cities, the counties are doing affordable housing projects rather than the city. So I don't have any problem with the overall funding plan or anything. It's with the scoring and the nature of the scoring. I think keeping partisan policies out of our programs helps us have a better support at the legislature, because we need broad support for these programs if they're going to continue.
All right, well, thank you for that comment. And also note there is a letter from Metro Cities in the exhibit. Councilmember Lilligren, do you want to, or would you like staff?
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chair. And I would note that Director Barajas and Ms. Hannah Gary, who runs the program, are here as well to provide more sort of depth and detail. And I appreciate Councilmember Wolf bringing her concerns forward, and they were discussed at committee as well. I will say in general, the approach of the committee was to make these programs as accessible as possible. And so taking into some of the considerations of the different nature of communities across the metro that Councilmember Wolf raises. And so there was a deliberate attempt to create accessibility for more communities, but there, as Councilmember Wolf said, there is a threshold amount of equity points, and that reflects the priorities that this council has put on equity. And so I would turn to Director Barajas as she's has something to add, or I don't know if Councilmember Barber wants to be a little more specific about the League of or Metro Cities letter, or some specific points, or just kind of overall.
For me, I think it's overall. When I look at, I've had some cities that have been fairly competitive, and it's actually going through the Livable Communities process is a step almost for them to change their policies and things to align with some of these. But I think pushing some of the more suburban and even rural center cities to do it ahead of things is counterproductive. And so I want to understand, I want to get a feeling if that is what's happening, or if there's still an opportunity for, a community like a Waconia or something like that, that is definitely part of the region, but somewhat separate from the metro, how that would work, and whether a city like Chaska or Carver would still be able to compete with this sort of framework. So, because they've done good things and good projects with this program and really help to change their communities and their policies. So I want to make sure that we're doing the best that fits, because as I've said many times, whatever policy we put in place has to work in Minneapolis and has to work in Chaska and has to work in Northern Young America. So with that, I'll turn it over to Lisa.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, council members. I really appreciate the discussion, and certainly that is the core of the work that we and Tara Beard, who wasn't able to be here today as the LCA manager, and her team have been focused on, is meeting those core statutory requirements that are both about reinvestment in the core cities and investment and diversity of the housing stock within the suburban communities in the metro area. So really thinking through, who will this impact? How can we make this accessible? What are different ways that criteria can be used and interpreted and applied that will still result in competitive projects in different parts of the metro area? What you see are the scoring criteria this year have been only moderately refined based on our experience and implementation in the 2021 funding cycle, which was a much larger lift to try to simplify that process and to kind of reduce some of the redundancies we had in scoring similar things across different areas, add clarity, but also map the scoring criteria to the adopted policies of the council as well. I know Hannah is deeply involved in that work and certainly can dig into some of those details in this if that is the will of this committee or the council at this time. I would say we regularly work with metro cities in receiving their feedback, and always are hearing from folks on, some things that are elements that carry across multiple funding cycles that we are working to resolve and address, and some things that maybe only we're hearing from one person that we need to work through in more detail. So we appreciate the comments from Metro Cities, and I know that Tara had a follow-up conversation with the staff over there as well, and provided that sort of written, this is what we discussed, feedback that was more of a conversation, but really appreciate the continued partnership with Metro Cities and ensuring that broad access across all of the participating communities in this program, but also furthering the council's adopted policies as well. So I certainly, Hannah, if there's additional detail that you'd like to add, or if the council would like to, us to elucidate other thoughts, I'm happy to do that as well.
Thanks, Lisa. I can add in just a little bit more detail, specifically speaking from the LCDA perspective. So like Lisa had mentioned, we don't have significant changes from last year to this year because we do wait to see how those changes that we've made are impacting projects that are coming through and cities' ability to apply. And we have introduced a new annual survey that we'll be doing every year so that we can get input from everyone who has applied in the previous year on their experience going through the process, how they feel about the scoring criteria. And at least in the LCDA accounts in this past year, we did see new suburban applications from cities that either hadn't applied in a long time or I believe had never applied, which is really exciting. And we did see those cities score well and end up getting funded and were able to go through meeting the minimum equity score. So it's definitely something that we are working with cities on and trying to make sure that no city is disadvantaged based on their geography as we come up with that scoring criteria.
Okay, that's really helpful, Hannah. Thank you. Go ahead, Deb.
Thank you. I just want to understand, Councilmember Wolf had alluded to that it was requiring at some points for cities to, or counties to change policies ahead of being able to apply. Is that the case? I guess I don't get that. I would like to understand that.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Councilmember Barber. And for cities to apply, the only policies that are required for a city to apply, which I guess it's required for disbursement of funds, not actually for application, is a fair housing policy. We don't require that cities change any of their policies in application. We do publish a document called Evaluation Explanations, which gives additional questions that our reviewers are going to be asking themselves and examples for how cities can score points. One example of how a city can score points in a particular piece of the team capacity section is having a DBE policy, but we also look at whether or not the city is assessing disparities within their city, if the city is involved in something like GARE. So we give a range of options for cities to be able to achieve those points, knowing that different cities are coming to this application from different places, really trying to work with cities to give them opportunities to score points in different areas of our scoring criteria.
So let me ask a question. So Watertown years ago had applied for a TBRA grant. What would they need to do to be able to apply for that grant today? Lisa probably has to answer this one because Hannah doesn't have the history. Sorry. In the weeds.
Mr. Chair, Councilmember Barber, you know, our application process, or our actual application questions are different, but there isn't, especially in TBRA, isn't very much different that they would need to do. The question, especially in cleanup, the cleanup questions are the same. What's the level of contamination? What do you propose to do after this? What's your cleanup plan? All of those elements go into that. Their process wouldn't look too different in TBRA. In the remainder of the programs, our goal has been to simplify the application process to make that application easier and more accessible for even our smaller communities that don't have a staff who only do applications to actually be able to do this as part of their everyday work. And certainly the team, Hannah and the team, do a lot of work to provide assistance both in the webinar and in one-on-one opportunities as well to help communities understand what is needed in different areas. But generally, it's pretty straightforward and should not be any more. It certainly should not be more difficult than it had been in the past.
I may have more
Councilmember-
questions, but I'll pass it off to Charlie if I see other people
Councilmember-
with hands up.
Sure, Councilmember Wolf, and back up.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Last year we added equity points and you needed a minimum equity score to proceed. And this year we added some additional equity points and raised the minimum equity score. We have not had a whole lot of opportunity to evaluate that. Our staff has been talking to the people who applied, but we haven't had time to talk to the people who didn't apply and figure out how well that's being received by the region and whether it actually results in better projects. But as far as making those minimum equity requirements, there are points within there that are based on policies that the city has for its other business, which is the part that I'm concerned about. And it also has points about who is on the project team and other sorts of things that could, if you're in, say, Carver, if you have a local developer that owns the land, wants to develop it himself using local resources, and the city doesn't have all these other policies that many of the big cities do, they would have a hard time scoring well on the points to make the minimum equity points to be considered or approved for funding. That's my concern, that we haven't looked into that well enough, and we've added some of that into TBRA as well now. We have simplified the process from what it was, but we made some different complications that we haven't fully sussed out as to whether they're working well or not, and that's my concern and why I'm going to vote no.
Okay, thank you. Any?
Chair, I had my
More
hand up, Councilmember Chambliss.
Oh, I'm sorry, I missed you. Go ahead, Councilmember.
Oh, that's okay. I wanted to say that I really appreciate the discussion that we've had regarding the changes, the pilot programs, and how they're administrated and the points. I think that's really important as we move forward. I've been involved with the Community Development Committee as a member, and also as chair of the Housing Work Group, the discussions on this process of changes. And I appreciate the fact that the changes have been looked at in a comprehensive way, making sure that we have more opportunities for more cities to participate, and in a way that helps us support thriving communities. That survey is going to be great to make sure that we are meeting our targets and that we are expanding the opportunities that we have. And I think we can still look at, those areas that after we've looked at it from last year, this year and going forward, if there are areas for us to improve, then I think we have plenty of opportunity to take a look at that. But I believe that we're on the right track, and that's why I'm going to vote for it.
Thank you. Any other comments on this issue?
Mr. Chair, this is Sue Vento.
Hi, go ahead, Sue.
Thank you. I'm calling in, so that's why you don't have to look at my face today, which is always good. But I am going to vote for the motion, but I really appreciate the issue that Councilmember Wolf has addressed. It's an issue that impacts a significant portion of the district I represent, or has the potential to. And I really hope that going forward, we can come up with a way to do outreach with communities that are eligible but aren't participating, and find out more about why. And I would be willing to even sit down with the cities and townships I represent and find out from them, have you considered it? Why haven't you considered it? What's holding you back? Are there things that we could do to help improve the process and the communications for you? I think it's critically important. This, if we want everybody to take on improving the region, then we got to meet everybody where they're at in this region. And I think the issues, as I said, that Councilmember Wolf raised are very, very legitimate, and I'm really grateful to her for doing that, and I'm grateful to Councilmember Barber for pursuing this conversation today. Thank you.
Thank you. This Councilmember Mousset, you have your hand up.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Although I understand the concerns some of my colleagues have, I also appreciate the intentionality here and intentionally focusing and prioritizing equity. So that's why I'm voting yes for this, the item. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Go ahead, Deb.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a final comment. I don't have any disagreements with the program funding amounts. I think all of that makes sense. I don't know that my questions fully around how this could impact some of our smaller cities and rural centers have been completely addressed. So I'm going to vote no tonight. But I do fully believe in the Livable Communities program. I think that, if nothing else, I think Councilmember Wolf and I and our sort of opposition to this isn't an opposition to the program. It's that we also, as an organization, need to find out how to talk with our suburban and rural communities about this and understand the impacts to them and how the program will work across the region to help the region. And so, so I'll be voting no tonight, but at heart, I do support this program and the overall funding levels, but I hope that we can come up with better talking points and how we communicate what this program does for some of the other centers around the region.
Great. Councilmember Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll just jump in and say a couple of things. I'm on the housing policy work group as well, of course, CDC, and constantly, I think I'm bringing up in what the things you're talking about is how do we get the suburban communities and those small cities participating? And I know on a variety of in a variety of ways, I know Tara has been doing a lot of outreach. I know my mayors have all been contacted, and also we've presented at my mayor's group that meets monthly. And so, I know staff is very aware of trying to reach beyond. I think the cities that have been participating frequently and have been part of livable communities to try to encourage them and solve and meet them where they're at and train and offer whatever it is they might need if they do have some interest. I've seen that firsthand. I really do appreciate the comments too, because, I have these very cities in my part of the region too. So, I'm going to vote yes tonight, but at the same time, if I've said it once, I've said it many, many, many times to our staff. How do we go beyond? And a lot of the programs we're really trying to pivot and focus on now are to do just that, so that nobody's left behind, and we can have more equitable, affordable housing in areas, again, outside of our central core cities. So I just want to put that in the record, hear it loud and clear, agree with it loud and clear, and I think we'll continue to make strides in that direction.
All right, thank you. We have Councilmember Gonzalez, followed by Councilmember Lee.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just briefly, a couple of thoughts that this conversation has sparked on me. One thing that I want to stress is that the only way in which we can do systemic change is by doing systemic change, is changing the system. So we are here today because we're still operating under systems that were set up in a different time for different purposes than the purposes that we're discussing today, which is have a more equitable housing development, that policies that do result in equal opportunities for affordable housing for all. So the first point that I would like us to always consider is if whatever policies the cities and the townships and the towns had in place and still haven't resulted in the kinds of equity outcomes that we want, if those policies are not working, then definitely this is an opportunity for them to take a look at their own houses and see where they can improve. And again, the comments that I'm hearing, I think that's exactly how this process is supposed to work. Folks don't, in some of the communities that are not used to this type of of scoring criteria might struggle in doing that. And we, of course, can support them in understanding and seeing how they can comply with those scores. But the whole point of doing this is to improve the outcomes, and the outcomes that we have are unacceptable. So if the outcomes that we have, which are unacceptable, are the result of the current policies in place, it's obvious that the policies need to change. That's again how you do systemic change. So I don't think it's an either or that we just can't force or encourage folks to change their policies because it's too hard. I think we can ask them to change their policies and support them as they do that, and provide the guidance and the technical expertise for them to successfully change any policies that they might need to change. But at the end of the day, we need to move forward. And what we've been doing, and when I say we, I mean the whole region, it hasn't worked in 160 years since Minnesota became a state. I don't think that doing the same thing is going to bring a different result. So change has to systemic change only happens again when we do systemic change. So I thank you for all the hard work in reviewing these policies, and hopefully we can have the real results that we all need and we want in the near future. So thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Lee.
Mr. Chair, yeah, I want to echo Councilmember Gonzalez's point. In the work that I do in my day job in nonprofit and anti-racism work, we say a system creates the exact outcome that it was intended to, and this is what we have, and this is what we see, and if we don't tackle the root problems head on, then the system will continue to create the outcomes that it was intended for. And I fail to see why or what makes equity policies a partisan issue. I don't think that's a partisan issue at all. We are a regional authority, and it is our job to uplift the whole region as a whole. And so I would be voting yes.
Great, thank you. Deb, do you have follow-up?
Just a very final question. I encourage my colleagues to go drive throughout the region and look at some of our cities and small rural centers and see that some of these places don't have staff to build policies. They hire consultants to actually do their comprehensive plans and pull together to do it because they don't have the staff for some of these things. Are those necessarily the communities that will qualify for livable communities? Sometimes yes and sometimes no. But again, we have to make sure that we're building something that isn't a one-size-fits-all and that we're looking at everything because that at the different needs of the different cities, because I think some of those needs are very distinctly different by what kind of resources each individual community has. So.
All right.
Mr. Chair, this is Councilmember Vento, and I want to strongly second what Councilmember Barber just said. It would be really great to really go out and see those communities. There's great potential there, but there's only potential if we help open the door, and I think how we approach this is really key.
If only we had a bus, we could take a tour. Oh, wait a minute, we could do that. Any other comments? I thought this was a fast meeting, but it had a really robust conversation. I just really applaud this time that we've taken, and whether you are voting yes or no, I would consider this to be an ongoing conversation. And we have, let's see, Wendy, do you have an additional comment?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would note that I have asked, in our work plan for community development, there will be more work on figuring out all of this sort of issue. I need to push back a little bit on the comments about the nature of how these communities are from Councilmember Gonzalez, because I'm talking about if a community wants to apply for funding to build affordable housing, but might not be able to qualify because they don't have policies like Minneapolis and St. Paul. We're not talking about somebody trying to, build a wall around their city and not let anybody in that they don't like. We're talking about communities that are trying to build affordable housing, but would be faced with the need to do things unrelated to the affordable housing in order to be approved for funding. And one of the issues that I brought up in community development also was that these policies that we're pursuing on equity, we haven't done any research to see whether they're actually accomplishing what we want them to accomplish. We're going off of what we sort of feel like will make things better, but without empirical research on whether it actually does work better, there can be unintended consequences.
Okay, thank you, Wendy. Lisa, did you want to give us some clarifying comments here?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, council members. I just wanted to clarify and emphasize something that Hannah said earlier, that we don't require any policies for communities to participate. The requirements for participation are already set in state law. That's the eligibility process that we had just gone through for re-enrollment over the last 2 years. Those are around planning for affordable housing in your local comprehensive plan, guiding that appropriate amount of land for doing that. Those elements and passing a local resolution, those elements are outlined in state law. Those are the eligible requirements. As Hannah noted earlier, we have an evaluation guide that shows how we're thinking about how we score these different elements and in the criteria that you see in the business item here. And the examples are provided as illustrative examples. They're not the only way that communities can receive points, but are meant to be a guide for how communities might think about it. There are certainly things that are not on those lists that communities could be doing that illustrate how they are meeting those the goals of those different areas. So I just wanted to emphasize and clarify that not having a certain policy does not make you ineligible to apply.
Important point. Councilmember Johnson.
And I think, again, hearing all of the input, I really want to thank Director Baraha for bringing that up, because that was never my understanding, that if you didn't have a Minneapolis or St. Paul or Central City policy in your own comp plan toolkit, you're out. I've never heard that. So I think we're following state law. And then I know as our team is going out and meeting with these communities, I think we're trying to assess if they have interest in this and how we can kind of encourage them to be part of this program and where the gaps and barriers are for them. Because you're right, to Councilmember Barber's point, they don't have staff that is a community development director, and they don't have an HRA, and they've got to hire, expensive consultants. And so even to just start that can be very intimidating, but that's why we're there to try to help them with, some of even the resources that we have. Or I know that some of my communities have been put in touch with neighboring communities that are part of this program to find out and learn from best practices and maybe just some support that way. So it is hard for small communities, there's no doubt, but at least from what I've been learning, this is an effort to help extend into these communities and to not be punitive. That I would never support. I've railed against anything that would prohibit people from doing the right thing, or the things that they want to do, which are the right thing. So I'm just going to add that as well. It's a great debate. Really appreciate this. I always have some very good takeaways from everybody. But, again, I'm going to be voting yes for this, but I'm very, very mindful of all of the good comments that have been made.
Okay. Lisa, do you still have your hand up from before? Or? Okay. All righty. I think we might be ready to vote. So if everybody feels heard, then Liz, you may call the roll.
Barber,
No.
Chambliss,
Aye.
Cummings,
Aye.
Fredson,
Aye.
Gonzalez,
Aye.
Johnson,
Aye.
Lee,
Aye.
Lilligren, Lindstrom,
Aye.
Musset,
Aye.
Pacheco,
I'll abstain.
Sterner,
Aye.
Vento,
Aye.
Wolf,
No.
Zurin,
Aye.
and Chair Zelli.
Aye. All right, that motion carried. On to the Environment Committee, where there are no reports. There's also no reports from the Management Committee. Next up is the Transportation Committee, where we have 2 items. Councilmember Barber.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You get to listen to me talk some more. So,
You're very welcome.
thank you. Mr. Chair, council members, business item number 2022-46 is regarding the release of the Metro E-Line Recommended Corridor Plan for public comment. The E-Line Recommended Corridor Plan identifies station locations for the E-Line Arterial Bus Rapid Transit Corridor. A draft version of this plan was published on September 20th, 2021. Comments on the draft plan were accepted through October 31st, with significant communications and outreach activities conducted during the comment period. Based on feedback received on the draft corridor plan, additional analysis of alternative platform locations was performed at several stations, and changes are recommended at 3 stations. In addition to these changes, a summary of feedback received on the draft plan and expanded discussion of priorities for bus-only lanes along the corridor are also included in the recommended corridor plan. Following release of the recommended plan, staff will continue outreach and engagement around the plan. Staff will bring a final corridor plan for council approval following the recommended plan comment period. Upon completion and approval, the plan will identify the final plan locations for E-Line stations in advance of engineering. Discussion at the Transportation Committee included support for staff to continue engaging with and listening to stakeholder voices, and a question about the feedback received on the scale of the stations. Mr. Chair, I move that the Metropolitan Council authorize release of the Metro E-Line Recommended Corridor Plan for public review and comments, and direct staff to collect public comments through Friday, April 8th, 2022, summarize comments, and report the findings to the Metropolitan Council.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Cummings seconds.
All right, thank you, Councilmember Cummings. Any more discussion? Councilmember Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to thank the team. I want to thank Kyle, and I know Yumi is very actively engaged in this, and I'm going to be abstaining on this tonight. I'm wearing my 50th in France Executive Director hat right now because I don't want there to be a conflict of interest for me in this. I will just say, though, and I know Peter on our team and Kyle and Yumi, you know, I had sent in comments to our team, and I'm so grateful they came out and spoke with the businesses at 50th and France as part of the public input. But I know my Gmail account for my work was being spammed and wasn't getting to Councilmember Cummings and team members. And then I got some other feedback, actually via the mayor of Edina, where there were others further south of us on France that had put comments in, but they saw the numbers that had been counted for comments. And I just would like this team to make sure that our spam filters aren't catching people that might be emailing in about this or whatever. Because I mean, even I had to get over onto my council email to get my, you know, invites and my messages through. So, you know, as we do outreach, we just hopefully aren't, you know, getting a whole bunch of people's feedback stuck in our spam filters or firewalls. I just want to say that. That's all.
Great. Well, we need to check, make that happen. Any other comments? All right, hearing none. Liz, you may call the roll.
Barber,
Aye.
Chambliss,
Aye.
Cummings,
Aye.
Fredson,
Aye.
Gonzalez,
Aye.
Johnson,
Abstain.
Lee,
Aye.
Lilligren,
Aye.
Lindstrom,
Aye.
Musset,
Aye.
Pacheco,
I'll abstain, but I will read more and I'll be ready next meeting.
Sterner,
Aye.
Vento,
Aye.
Wolf,
Aye.
Zurin,
Aye.
Chair Zelli.
Aye, that motion carried. And Councilmember Pacheco, there's I have not yet seen any spot quizzes or examinations, but your participation is always welcome. All right, Councilmember Barber, another action.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, council members, business item number 2022-60 is about the First Amendment to the updated 2040 Transportation Policy Plan to amend in the arterial bus rapid transit network next system and amend in the 6 MnDOT freight project selections, as well as accepting the related public comment report for the amendment. Under federal law, the 2040 Transportation Policy Plan is required to identify regionally significant transportation investments that will be implemented within the timeframe of the plan and must maintain fiscal balance between anticipated project costs and projected available funding. This amendment to the 2040 TPP includes changes incorporating results of multiple arterial BRT planning projects for the E-Line, B-Line, and the results of Metro Transit's Network Next. The amendment also recognizes 6 projects that were awarded funding through MnDOT's Minnesota Highway Freight Program. During the public comment period, there were 56 comments from 41 commenters on the proposed amendment, with the council response shown as an attachment. 12 comments on the ADRT projects, 24 comments in support of one of the freight projects, Highway 212, 20 general comments on a wide variety of transportation issues. Based on these comments, one change is recommended. One of the comment letters was from the city of Bloomington. Based on Network Next results, this amendment originally recommended removal of American Boulevard from the increased revenue scenario as an arterial BRT corridor. However, given the unique characteristics of the corridor and the city of Bloomington's commitment to fund a transitway study, the corridor will remain in the TPP increased revenue scenario as a transitway to be studied for mode and alignment. The city of Bloomington is satisfied with this change. Therefore, Mr. Chair, I move that the Metropolitan Council accept the 2040 Transportation Policy Plan Amendment Number 1 Public Comment Report and adopt Amendment 1 to the 2040 Transportation Policy Plan, including red line edits proposed by staff in response to public comment, to amend in the arterial bus rapid transit network next system, and to amend in 6 MnDOT freight project selections.
All right, thank you. Is there a second?
Second that, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Any discussion? I'm glad to see American Boulevard back in.
Mr. Chair?
Yes, please, Councilmember
Molly.
Cummings. Molly.
I just wanted to comment also, I said this at transportation, but I really appreciate that staff worked very hard and very closely with Bloomington, the city of Bloomington, because to keep this in the as a potential with the expanded revenue, it shows that we partner with our communities, we take their input, we take it seriously, we look for ways to support and bring people in. I think it's really, really important that we do that. They had some really important ideas that they brought forward and planning that they've been doing for quite some time. So it's very much appreciated by the city of Bloomington. And again, I think it reflects really positively on the work that the council does. And so thank you to the entire team for spending the time and the resources and the energy to meet with Bloomington and address their concerns and keep them in the plan. Thank you.
Thank you. Any additional comments? Councilmember Barber.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll keep it very brief. Just a thank you to all the staff. This sounds like a very simple thing that we're doing, but this is years of work. When you look at something like Network Next, this was really thoughtful planning that was put in when we knew that we had to look at the whole network and reprioritize where we were going first and how and why and where the investment was going to be the most significant and the most benefit to the region. And so this is a lot of big team effort. So a really big shout out to all of the team of people at MTS and the contributing efforts at Metro Transit. It's everyone, all of the efforts very well appreciated. So that's all I have.
All right, thank you. Councilmember Johnson.
And yeah, just briefly to Councilmember Barber's points too. I mean, and during a pandemic, so the outreach and the effort that they put in and trying to, continue to plan and not be just reactionary to pandemic, but understanding where changes might be made in the future. I mean, the team just has worked so hard, I think, to get us where we are today. So I just want to add my thanks.
Thank you. And really, outreach needs to be especially intentional given the pandemic and shows flexibility that we're actually listening. Great. Any other comments, thoughts? All right, hearing none. Liz, please call the roll.
Barber,
Aye.
Chambliss,
Aye.
Cummings,
Aye.
Fredson,
Aye.
Gonzalez,
Aye.
Johnson,
Aye.
Lee, Lilligren,
Aye.
Lindstrom,
Aye.
Musse,
Aye.
Pacheco,
Aye.
Sterner,
Aye.
Vento,
Aye.
Wolf,
Aye.
Zurin,
Aye.
and Chair Zelli.
Aye, that motion carried. So we're on to our final item, which is information briefing on the 2050 Regional Development Guide by the one and only Lisa Beth Baharas. This is who's been timely, maybe after our previous discussion, and I think Michael Larson is joining Lisa. So, welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, council members. For the record, Lisa Beth Barajas, Executive Director of Community Development, and joined by Mike Larson, who's our project manager for this visioning work of the Regional Development Guide. And I would like to just offer a minor modification to Chair Zelli's introduction. That is, won't be a briefing, but more of an engagement with you in this work and continued
Delightful.
engagement.
Don't sit back, everybody. We're going to be engaging.
Well, I sure hope it's delightful. I know this is the work that that our staff get most excited for. Of this, thinking forward. Our planners are always thinking about what's next, and kind of segueing from your previous conversation on Network Next, thinking about all of the systems that we have in front of us in the vision for the region that we want to have in 2050, adding another 10 years to our current planning cycle. So with that, I'll kind of kick it off, and I'll be turning it over to Mike to lead the discussion. So next slide, please. Just some, oops, I'll go back one. There we go. So just some grounding, just to be sure. You're going to see this a lot from us, and you're going to hear a lot from us this year and throughout the coming years as we continue to get deeper in this work. But to be sure that we have this continued shared understanding of why we do regional planning. And this legislative purpose was set out at the creation of the council, especially in the Land Planning Act, and the importance of regional planning, really recognizing that in this region, all of our communities are interdependent, that actions that one community takes don't just live within their borders, but can impact those all around them and across the region as well. And that continued growth in the region creates this need for public services. And even when this was passed in the early 70s, that there was increased risk of air and water pollution and water supply shortages that still live with us today, although in different forms, that we need to continue to think about and plan for and avoid it, obviously, where we can and mitigate to the best of our abilities. Those were all the underpinnings for why the legislature determined that there was a need for regional planning in the 7-county metro area. And so because of that, we were directed to do this and ensure the coordinated, orderly, and economical development of the region, and at that base of protecting public health, safety, and welfare, which all of our governments have in the state of Minnesota as at the core of their work. Different from other local governments, however, is that we have a very narrowly defined set of actions we can take and authorities that we have to further that within our work. Next slide, please. So building off of that, the statute does require that the council create a development guide that we are to prepare and adopt a comprehensive development guide for the metro area. And next slide, please. And that guide should really focus on, or really at its base is prescribing these guides for how development and where development will occur within the region. So that is the base of this work. This isn't all of the requirements of our work, but really this is the foundation of why we are doing this work and what we're meant to cover in our Metropolitan Development Guide. And I will just say at the start here, sometimes you'll hear me or our staff say Metropolitan Development Guide or Comprehensive Development Guide or Regional Development Guide. And it's not because we're confused, it's because actually the statute says all three things and it all means the same thing. So I just wanted to make that point of clarification up front, just to be sure. I try to keep it the same word, but in case I trip and say something else, that's what we mean. The other thing I wanted to point out here is also the words that are in that bolded blue on the bottom of the slide here, that we should be thinking about in this work, all of those future developments that will have an impact on the entire region. And that includes all of these things: land use, parks, excuse me, airports, highways, transit, and it's not limited to these things either. So really thinking about this as the core of our work and what we're trying to accomplish and what the purpose of the development guide is. Next slide, please. As I had noted previously, these aren't all of the requirements. We are also, we have additional requirements related to how we do our regional parks and trails planning, how we do our wastewater planning, how we do our transportation and transit planning that come both from state statute and from federal rules, and even how we do water supply planning in the region. And we'll get into that in more detail as we dig deeper into some of those areas, but today we're going to stay at that higher level vision level. So as I know our staff have said before, in any sort of planning process, whether it's a strategic plan or a comprehensive plan, we always start with the where are we today, then where do we want to go, and then how do we want to get there. So you've been hearing from staff over the last almost, I think, 2 years on report outs on where are we today. So the comp plan composite reports that even just at our last meeting last week on local plan priorities, those are meant to build that foundation on where we are today. We've also had developers panels, we've talked about COVID impacts, and we've had a number of other things. And certainly if we've missed something about where we are today that you would like us to report back on, investigate and report back on, we're happy to do that as well. Then we're going to be turning to where do we want to go. And that's part of really a lot of the work that we'll be doing in this year and moving into the coming year. And that policy development is how do we want to get there. Next slide, please. And I will turn this over then to Mike Larson to lead the remainder of this conversation. Thank you.
Micah, you may be muted. I'm not hearing.
My apologies.
No problem.
I have to click the mute button. Thank you, Lisa, for that intro. And good afternoon, council members. My name is Michael Larson. I'm planning analyst in the local planning assistance group in community development, and I'm the project manager for the values and vision process for the regional development guide. So as we introduce this work to you, I will share some of our thoughts on why we would want a regional vision. I'll also share some observations that staff have had about the effectiveness of the vision that's currently defined in Thrive MSP 2040. As part of preparation for engaging you on this work, we've done an inventory of recent council and advisory group meetings. And we'll share that information with you that generally affirm kind of our understanding of the kinds of issues that have been important to you recently. And finally, we will talk about some next steps with you and ask for your feedback around that, including additional internal and external engagement ideas. Next slide, please. So I want to talk a little bit about the qualities of a good vision. Vision statement really is about achieving consensus around what our desired future should look like and having some written language to describe that. I think we've all seen vision statements that we find particularly inspirational, or maybe on the other hand, vision statements that might seem naive or vague or perhaps unrealistic. I would argue that a good vision statement will both inspire and be clear, considering that our region does have challenges and problems. It should be evident why I think there are problems and that we are taking them seriously. and that we're rising to the challenge. And as we do have opportunities and strengths in our region, not just challenges, it should be also clear that we will embrace them for full and positive effect for the region's residents. And finally, the vision is intended to, for our purposes, set the general direction for the council's plan and policy development, which in turn directs us how we should conduct our business. Next slide, please. So a vision statement or vision set of statements should help us set the tone and general direction for plan development. Having said that, I also want to say that we don't envision a completely linear process where the vision is first set in stone and then that directs everything that follows. We have been asking staff in different technical work units about their thoughts about the region's vision. Staff work to implement policy and have a wealth of wisdom and experience that to share with us going forward. And as we work through future plan and policy development, there may be opportunities for us to improve and refine the clarity of our overall vision, including its consistency with the language that is developed in forthcoming policy and system plans. Next slide, please. Now I want to talk about how our current regional development guide describes the vision for the region. So this language is an intro language that occurs in Thrive. The Metropolitan Council has listened to the aspirations voiced by the region's residents, civic, nonprofit, and business leaders, and government officials, and woven their thoughts and hopes into 5 desired outcomes that define our shared regional vision. Next slide, please. So I think you should be familiar with these terms. Thrive introduced or strengthened these concepts around the 5 outcomes of stewardship, prosperity, equity, livability, and sustainability. Thrive really addresses these issues seriously and discusses their different dimensions in pretty great detail. There's considerable thought to how these different outcomes manifest themselves and how they are interrelated with each other. Next slide, please. So having said that, I want to share some ideas from staff about their reflections and experience on the Thrive outcomes in their work. For many of us, these 5 outcomes seem at times more like principles or values than outcomes. It doesn't work very well as a coherent vision for the region. This particular section of Thrive is quite long. It's 50 pages. The text is very dense, often with long lists of ideas and contextual information. Stewardship, for example, is a great value, but it's very broad and could apply to many different things. Stewardship of a capital asset like a train is very different than stewardship of the environment. While Thrive does address this, the different dimensions of stewardship, it can be kind of clumsy to talk about this as a specific vision or outcome. Equity, obviously very important to the region. Equity can be considered to be a value rather than a vision. I think we could use equity in many different ways. If it is a value, it presents a need to define what our vision for equitable outcomes would be. While Thrive does discuss the different dimensions of equity, it doesn't do so in a very clear or concise way. An equitable future, for example, might be one where we would significantly reduce or eliminate racial income and wealth gaps. The value of equity could also guide how we conduct our processes, ensuring that we develop relationships with different communities and engage them in the most appropriate and effective ways. When we talk about the value of equity, we could start to use other language, other complementary language, like fairness, compassion, or justice. So that's maybe something to consider. Another example, livability, could be considered an outcome. However, it is a very broad concept, and it really means different things to different people. It's probably the hardest to define. The text, for example, discusses many different things, ranging from the burden of student debt, complete streets, parks, park and rides, and housing preferences of different demographic groups. So it's a bundle of information in that particular outcome. Finally, having gone through some reflection and critique of Thrive, a common theme on our discussions that when we are finished with this process, we would expect to see a lot of these things, many, if not most of these ideas, reflected, reorganized, rearticulated in ways that will be more helpful for planning and implementation and easier for staff to implement. Next slide, please. So again, when we think about vision, we should also think about how we're ultimately going to use it and how it will guide us. On this particular slide, you see a list of terms that follow from the vision in terms of a planning and implementation process. They have not been used consistently across our plans, and we are working to develop some shared definitions of them going forward, so the plans talk the same language and can look back towards the vision. So these terms, the language that you see here may be tweaked and defined a little bit going forward. So this may look a little bit different depending on where things land. You may be familiar with the term progressive elaboration. Basically, it means that we further articulate things as the work requires and as we understand something better or in more detail. And so our goal is for the vision and values to be as succinct and brief as possible, or as long as it needs to be. It should really be clear about how, at the end of the day, it should be clear about how the vision translates into our regional development guide and our system and policy plans and our measures. The measures that we identify to evaluate our work should tell us if we're being successful, and if not, reevaluate or redirect our efforts upstream. Next slide, please. There you go. Very good. So last week at the Committee of the Whole, you heard a synopsis of local plan priorities. Another foundational piece of input into our vision process has been to understand how recent conversations have occurred in various committee and advisory group meetings that may reflect your overall interest and priorities. Gabby Olvera and Local Planning Assistance listened to 56 archived meetings of the committees that you see on the screen, including each of the council committee meetings and all of the council's advisory bodies. Next slide, please. So Gabby coded comments from each of these committee meetings and advisory group meetings around the 10 exploratory issues that we originally defined for the 2050 Regional Development Guide process. And those 10 exploratory issues are on the screen right now. To get into a little more detail, members of the committees and groups discuss, for example, the affordability of housing and transit, how climate change might be help mitigated through various projects that we might do, ensuring that communities are involved in decision-making processes, particularly how the projects that those we impact or could benefit from the most, how infrastructure projects could uplift marginalized communities, how disparities exacerbated by the pandemic can be addressed, ensuring that the regional park system is accessible and contributes to public health, how regional policies can be designed to fit and be flexible, considering a local context, how ideas of shared prosperity can be better articulated, how the experience of, for example, of immigrant farming communities might teach us something about land stewardship, and how racial bias and safety concerns affect people's experience on the transit system. Next slide, please. Okay, this graph shows the distribution of frequency of comments by issue. The blue bars represent the percentage of comments among the various council meetings, council and council committee meetings, while the green bars show the distribution of comments by advisory groups as a whole. At the risk of stating the obvious, please keep in mind that obviously the comments and discussion naturally follow from the agendas. However, I think there are some interesting things to note. Not surprisingly, equity remains a top discussion item, accounting for a significant percentage of the comments for both council and advisory group meetings. TAB and the Transportation Advisory Board and the Equity Advisory Committee discuss equity the most at their meetings, followed by the Metropolitan Parks and Open Space Commission. Infrastructure is a top discussion item among advisory groups, and not surprisingly, TAB accounts for slightly more than half of those comments. And obviously, again, this is not terribly surprising given the nature of those meetings. From a staff perspective, I have a couple of reactions to this information for your consideration. A few of the issues, the exploratory issues that we had identified, received less attention than we might expect. Those include climate change and pandemic recovery. Lower representation of those issues in your discussion could represent a need to better highlight or integrate these topics into forthcoming agendas, perhaps adding opportunities for greater specificity or clarity around the planning issues. So I will welcome, when it's appropriate to pause, I will welcome your thoughts on whether this might be the case. But I have a couple more slides on this evaluation, this meeting evaluation. So next slide, please, Greg. So there were obviously issues are connected to one another, and the more obvious connections between the issues were equity and its relationship to affordability, infrastructure, and whether in welcoming and safe communities. Climate, when it was discussed, was often discussed in conjunction with equity and public health issues. And the issues of resilience and stewardship concepts around climate. Next slide, please. So, here are some additional thoughts that we had for the memo. In addition to the 10 exploratory issues, just staff noticed the frequency of, comments related to the value of communication, the importance of collaboration, community engagement, and understanding communities as we work with them. And so we wanted to, reemphasize and show that back to you. Next slide, please. So we will be developing a public engagement. We're in the process of developing a public engagement plan with support of communications staff based on the principles of the council's overall public engagement plan. And some of those principles include ensuring a range and diversity of voices, using engagement to reinforce or develop new trusting relationships with stakeholders and communities, ensuring that all suggestions for input are considered, including documentation on how we incorporate or do not incorporate suggestions, and then also circling back to participants to discuss how we did or did not include them. Utilizing existing groups and forums, such as the advisory groups, to solicit input and to generate dialogue. And we have a few of those meetings set up already. We want to integrate this engagement effort with other engagement efforts related to the development of the Regional Development Guide, and with consideration how system and policy plans will ultimately engage their stakeholders. We fully expect that there may be stakeholders who aren't very interested in a visioning process, but maybe more interested in the details of the policy and plan development, and that's something we will articulate and document. One, I think, very exciting idea that we're kind of putting together and exploring is the formation of a youth cohort for this and other engagement efforts. Our idea is to solicit the input of residents in the region that may be in their teens to early 20s. The idea is to identify a group that will demographically represent the future, and who maybe by 2050 may be at some midpoint in their career and have had families. So supporting engagement of those young people and investing them in the future in terms of the plan development. And my colleague Darcy Vanderhoof in research has extensive experience working on this type of thing and is assisting on this effort. We've provided you with foundational materials to kind of prepare you for the planning process, and particularly the comp plan composite work from local comprehensive plans. Oh, not yet. Go back, please. So the comp plan composite information is a significant source of input. That local wisdom is something that we want to consider for the next regional development guide. Next step in terms of foundational materials for this discussion is as a inventory of our region's strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. We think the vision statement, the values should be grounded in that understanding, so that the plan addresses known issues and opportunities. We will also provide summary information about how existing vision statements and values, how we might, whether those could influence our work or could be considered as we draft language. Finally, we've got sessions lined up throughout the balance of the year, committee of the whole meetings to engage you on this and other aspects of the 2050 Regional Development Guide, and we'll continue to solicit input from subject matter experts who implement our policy plans and our staff working groups. Next slide, please. So as we begin to structure our engagement and consider what might be the final outcome or product from this process, here's kind of some of the high-level questions we're asking ourselves and of others. What are the region's values and how do they relate to the council's influence? And by influence, I mean authority, operations, grants, that kind of thing. And how do they work? How do they relate to the work of our partners? What is the region's vision, and how do our values inform that vision? What's the connection? How should the language be organized, and how much detail is needed? And with due consideration of how this will impact policy development. And with an understanding again that everything's related to everything else, what are the key interrelationships among the issues? A lot of that is discussed in Thrive, but can we provide can we simplify that in a way that's more useful for say policy refinement or program development? And what are the high level outcomes we want to achieve for the region? So I fully expect we will get a lot of input, hopefully in a way that re-energizes people about our region's challenges and opportunities. We want to make sure that all of the input that we get finds a home in our process. If not in the vision, then maybe somewhere else. And use it as a way to strengthen our relationships and our work. So it's not just the words on the page, but how we align our work together. How we support one another. I imagine some stakeholders may have very specific ideas and detailed suggestions, maybe too much detail to live in a regional vision, but could be reflected again, in some other part of the plan. So that next slide. That's what we have for you today, and I would love to hear your thoughts about that overview, and especially in ways that we can engage you the most effectively during this process, what your needs and interests are, and in what form and format would be most useful to provide concrete ideas and suggestions and dialogue around that. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Michael, and thank you, Lisa. And this is really exciting, and I know we're talking about really initiating a whole process, but this is so beautifully laid out, and really appreciate that. Let's get some comments and reactions. Riva, you have your hand up.
Mute myself. Yes, thank you for this presentation. It's really nice to be able to look at this 2050 regional guide in terms of the approach from the very start. 2050 seems like a long time away, but some of these things have to get started now in order for us to accomplish our vision. So what we're doing with these guides and this advanced planning is so critical in how we approach it and how we lay the foundation. And I'm really glad to see how the Metropolitan Council is approaching this guide. I'm sure that there were best practices along the way that are going to be applied to the 2050 guide. And I really like the fact that you've outlined the vision process, the qualities, and how the values can shape and influence decisions that are made and our policy. So well done. I'm looking forward to taking the year that's left of my current term into this process. So thank you so much.
Great, thank you. Molly.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Lisa and Michael, for this presentation. It's just great. It's really exciting. It's it does get one pumped up thinking about what's coming next. So that's very good. I have a comment and then a question. I really, really, really like the cohort of youth and young adults. I think that's absolutely critical. I mean, it is their future that we are planning and thinking and talking about. So I think that's really important. Also, whenever we bring youth into the conversation, you know, they don't have the same old kind of mentality that just kind of keeps things going. Well, this is the way we've always done it, but they come in with creativity and with enthusiasm and with great ideas. And so I'm really, really excited about that. And then my question, and I don't know if this is the proper place to raise it, but I'm going to bring it up. So in a lot of this, we talk about the EAC and the EAC involvement, and you know, recently we've had a presentation from the EAC, and there were frustrations expressed in ways that we could more fully engage and more usefully apply what they bring. I think it is critical that we find ways to work more cooperatively and satisfy some of the needs and the questions that they brought up their presentation a couple of months ago. So I think that some of their issues were going to be referred to maybe the management committee for further conversation, but I'm sort of curious as to, or I'm hoping, I guess, that we will get an update into what sort of resolution, if there was one, or how their concerns were addressed by the council and how we might involve them more deeply. I think that's a really, really important part of all of the planning that we do, is what the EAC brings to all of our planning. So I hope that we can get an update on what they're doing and how we're addressing. And then again, this is a great presentation. I'm really excited about what you're doing and look forward to how we might all participate. Thank you.
Great. And while we have that thought, thanks, Molly. Mike, did you want to respond to that? Oh, you're muted again.
Dang it.
3 strikes. We're going to throw you out of the meeting. Sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Councilmember Cummings. I would like to respond. I think many of us did watch that meeting and reviewed the materials and heard the critique. Although we are developing and have not yet finished a public engagement plan, we are engaging. We'll be engaging our advisory bodies in different ways, and we will identify that. We do have a few meetings set up, and we are on the agenda for the EAC in April, so we will be having a similar presentation. I think we've heard that they want to be engaged early, and they we want to give them perhaps some homework in advance and keep the presentation a bit tighter than it was today, so that there's more time for discussion. I think all staff, I can speak for all staff, that we are all, consider equity to be important in regional planning issue. And our process includes our own internal equity task force. And there will be, through our stakeholder analysis, we would identify stakeholder groups that most are directly impacted by our equity issues in the region and needs. And so that's something that we can Yeah, I should also mention that EAC members have been part of our scenario planning workshops, and so we're thinking about modeling that process for the vision. So we will ask, like, deferring to the values and approaches in the council's public engagement plan, we will ask them how they want to be engaged and what the most effective way to engage them over time is, rather than presume.
Right. Robert.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks, Lisa and Michael, for your work and to your teams as well. This is really exciting. I was interesting listening to Councilmember Cummings say how excited she gets about this. And I think it takes a particular type of person to be excited by planning out 20, 30 years. And I find it really exciting as well. And Michael, just on your last point, and this, I really appreciate how you're thinking about engaging the advisory groups and specifically the Equity Advisory Committee, and the kind of framework you just presented to us really reflects their comments, right? They're looking to kind of get into the discussion and the substantive part, and so sort of designing in a way where we can give them information in advance, sort of trim down the presentation part to let them use their time together, to support them using their time together to really grapple with the issues, whether that's the Equity Advisory Committee or any of the advisory groups. I think that's a great approach. I really also appreciate your comments about sort of the outcomes and the staff perspective on the outcomes and how they were sort of framed in ways that seem more like values or something, and that makes them difficult as outcomes to work toward. So I just think that's really insightful, and that's good for us to hear. So I'm interested in seeing how that kind of plays out. And you said this staff person's name a few times, and I'm sorry, I just didn't get it, but the one who audited the meetings and collected the discussion emphasis data, so thank her. That's amazing. But also, I just find that kind of data really useful. And so I don't know if that's a practice that we tend to employ going forward, but just seeing that, as policymakers, of course, we're always data people, trying to look at ways of comparing disparate things. And I just found that really helpful. And I could see how much work that it really is. And the other piece, and I just don't remember this before, and maybe it is in the 2040 plan, but this idea of issue connections. And I think that's a great approach, and I look forward to seeing if that kind of grows into a even more robust way. And we always talk about breaking down silos or whatever, but if we're doing it at the fundamental planning step, and we're looking for these connections, these intersections, I just think it'll help our work. It'll support the progress within the region so well. So I look forward to seeing how that plays out. Thank you for your work. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Great comments. Building on that, Lisa and Michael, I love your lessons learned early in the presentation and realizing that to actually get greater clarity and actually distill the thoughts into true vision, that actually takes more work. I mean, like I didn't have a time to write a short one, so I wrote a long. It will actually is a really insightful observation that there's a lot of reflection, but less like, okay, here's really the focus areas. Here's kind of, and I think that it is it may be a challenge given the breadth of our engagement, but also to bring that to a point where it'll be meaningful is a good track to be on. Other thoughts, reactions?
Mr. Chair, if I may add on to that, not only does that help us as staff responsible for the implementation on a day-to-day basis, but also to report back to you on what are we doing and to report back to the public, and for our for all members of the region to be able to say, this is what they're doing. They can see it easily easy to find. It makes it a much more accessible document. So while, we might have brought our own personal experiences to it, we do see a lot of value in across the region in all of our work in having much more clarity in what that vision is and what we're trying to accomplish.
But as you point out, more accessible makes it more impactful. Anyone else? I'll count to three. As I think you've said, this is a start. It's really helpful to see the kind of next steps. We'll have more opportunities in various places to provide our own inputs and reactions along the way. Please call on us. And I think I appreciate Councilmember Lilligren saying, boy, this really could tell people who got really resonated. I'm one of those people too, so I think it's wonderful. Yeah. All right, last chance.
Well, Mr. Chair, if I
please.
May I? We did indicate that we would be engaging with you through primarily Committee of the Whole. Certainly, if there are other places you would like us to be and to be engaging with you in different ways, we would love that feedback. This is how we're starting, so we don't have to end here either. You might say in a couple of months, maybe we need to do this differently. So this won't be the last time we ask. We'll keep asking, is this the way you want to be engaged, or is there a different way that you would prefer? And that can always change. And I would also offer on the slide that Mike had shared with questions for consideration as we're thinking about developing that, I would offer that those are seeds that we're planting with you today. We're going to keep asking those questions of you. We're going to be sharing what we're hearing with our partners and our advisory group members and feedback from the region on that too, as we continue to further refine and articulate what that vision is for the region. So be thinking about that. I ask for you to be, as you're sitting there drinking your coffee in the morning, what should our values be? Be thinking about that, and certainly we'll be coming back to you and asking you not once or twice, but many times throughout the year.
Well, and I'd also offer, as ambassadors of the Met Council to the region, we all have opportunities to speak to different groups. We attend various other city council meetings, other chambers interactions. I know I do. And it really be helpful for us to be asking that question and kind of represent that here's the things we'd love to hear, and maybe give a sense to a larger region of the role we're playing. So Councilmember Lindstrom. Now you're muted.
Sorry. Just on this point, I presented to a class of young people, 20-year-olds last week, and it was the end of a very long class, maybe a 3-hour long class, and I was the last speaker. It was like 8:30 at night, and they were so engaged. It was really positive. Thinking about this prospective youth cohort, I think I'll second that or reiterate the importance of that. Just this one experience, I felt like I was before one of those legislative committees that you find yourself in front of from time to time, Mr. Chair.
Yours
They might have been a little bit more. Yeah, they might have been a little bit more forgiving, but great questions and lots of engagement.
Great. Well, that's a perfect example. Thank you. Well, we're going to have more chances to talk about it. Committee of the Whole, we'll think about other areas. But again, Lisa, Mike, thank you so much for sharing that today. Is any other reports that anyone would like to share since we're together? Peter, go ahead.
Just real quick, we had a report at the Environment Committee yesterday about our wastewater surveillance, which some of you may have seen some articles in the paper about that. It's fascinating. We've got a web page that's dedicated to our wastewater surveillance. You recall that we have a great partnership with the University of Minnesota on this, and it's showing the viral loads in our wastewater compared to the COVID positive tests. And it's interesting to see the viral loads peak about a week before you see the COVID positive test peak. What's even more interesting is that on any given month, our Met Council homepage gets, I'm told, about 10,000 hits. And this one page, this wastewater surveillance page last month, I think the number was over 16,000 hits on that page alone. So folks are really dialed into this. The general public is very dialed into it. We've got great partnerships, as I mentioned, with the university that's super interested. And then, of course, we're communicating with the Department of Public Health and other public health folks on a very, very regular basis on this too. So it's not just interesting data, but it's, I believe, turning into really actionable data that folks are using out there in the real world.
Thank you for pointing that out, Peter. I also have been attending a lot of the governor's forum to have some lessons learned about the pandemic, the state's response, various agencies' roles, and you know, how we would, as a state, continue to you know, monitor and to be prepared. And it was really gratifying to see the Department of Health and others really now, what was kind of a cool thing, now it's kind of an integral kind of early warning system that we are now part of, that is built into this kind of future kind of you know, reliability and responsiveness. Molly.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just furthering that a little bit more, in our meeting this month with the City of Bloomington, my meeting, their interagency meeting, they too were blown away by the information that was available, and then they had a number of other questions about what other things might be able to be detected, and if it could be geographically specific for our planning purposes and things. They had all kinds of questions, which I had forwarded to Lisa Thompson, and she passed it on as well to Steve Below, and he gave the most detailed, informative, incredible response to every one of their questions, and then a little bit beyond. And then Lisa also commented even further. So, you know, it is such valuable information, and it's being used by our communities in many interesting and thorough ways that maybe we haven't even thought about, that they're able to use and apply in their specific circumstances. But again, to ES, it's just, they're so good. I mean, I got a reply like within 24 hours, and it was detailed and it was thorough, and I was able to pass it on. And that is a lot to do, especially in these times where everyone is pulled, stretched to the max. So I really appreciate that, and it's quite an effort, and the information is so valued. So I just thank staff for that as well.
Well, Lisa, you've trained us well. We're not in the wastewater business. We're in the we produce clean water business. I got that, but turns out we're also in some of these other areas. So congratulations. You maybe have a few words.
I do, if that's okay, Chair Zelli. We are in the business of protecting public health, and being an early alarm system can clearly be a part of that. And it's a paradigm shift for sure for us to be thinking about that. We've heard from inquiries similar to what Molly was referring to about that granularity and specific to smaller regional sections or cities or communities. And we're open to that. If this is a service that there's a value that the region wants us to continue, we absolutely would set ourselves up on a more, I mean, this was a stretch for us to get the technology, because it's a very different testing and process than what we normally have done. But the folks with the mind power and the motivation and the interest to serve a purpose like this and a willingness to partner with others. And I really emphasize that. You know, if we thought we had to do it all on our own, we wouldn't be where we are today. And so it was cultivating that relationship with the youth and their capabilities and saying, together we can do something better. And so let's figure this out. And you know, those are the kinds of stories that get me excited to come to work every day. It's the inspiration of seeing a small group of people really do something pretty significant and cool. So we're gonna test the waters with our communities this spring when we go out and do our budget briefings. We'll probably tie it in with that, or it might be a separate one, but we'll find out what their interest is. And of course, we're also keeping an eye on the value in terms of where we end up with. You know, we're not endemic yet. Everybody's hoping we will be soon, but you know, some of it is the rest of the story as COVID unfolds.
Exactly. Well, great. Thank you. And please extend to your whole team our appreciation.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
this is Sue Vento. If it would be possible for us to all get a copy of the response that Steve provided for Councilmember Cummings' request, I'd appreciate it, because I'm going out to speak to some city councils in the not too distant future, and I'd love to have that information along in case they want to engage in some more conversation about it.
Chair Zelli, if I could suggest, I think we can take that information, but also add this new piece about exploring the possibility of taking that service another step forward and maintaining it as well. So we'll package that together and get that out to you.
That'd be great. Thank you. Perfect. Anyone else have a report? Mary Bogey, Regional Administrator.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just one quick note from me, and that is that it's my honor to publicly congratulate our General Counsel. Ann Bloodhart is the recipient of an award as the In-House Counsel of the Year in the category of Nonprofit and Government.
Sure.
This award is given by a Minnesota lawyer, and she was nominated by the Lockridge Grindle Nolan law firm. So congratulations, Ann, well deserved.
Congratulations, Ann. Wonderful.
Congratulations.
And I was going to ask you for a report, but we want an acceptance speech. And how'd you do it? We know how you did it.
Well, I mean, I'm really appreciative of the award, but I really think it's just a reflection of all the good work that my team does all of the time and the good work that the council does. But it is nice to be recognized when you're in the public sector, because we do work really hard. And I do actually have a report this week other than my award. We talked last year sometime about the Just Deeds project, which is a project to remove restrictive racial covenants from properties throughout the metropolitan region. And most of the attorneys on my staff are volunteering with it, and we had completed our training. We didn't have a chance yet to take on any particular work. In the meantime, last week, Hillary Lovelace, who's in our Livable Communities unit, discovered that 5 of the council properties are listed in the Just Deeds database and had restrictive covenants on them. So the day we found out, one of my attorneys, Darcy Erickson, drafted all of the paperwork and packaged it all together so that we can get those covenants removed from our properties. And now we'll be working with the Livable Communities unit and our real estate office to make sure that none of the other council houses that we have, or any of the ones that we're purchasing, also have those restrictive covenants on them. So just a step that we're taking that we think is consistent with this council, and it's just the right thing to do. So happy to announce we were able to get that done.
That's great.
And
Wonderful.
that's all I have.
Okay, well, congratulations on both your honor, but also that's nice to hear as a follow-up. Any other news for anybody? All right, well, we're got a few extra minutes. The sun's still up, so enjoy the day. great meeting, great conversation, discussion. And this meeting's adjourned. We will see you all soon.
Right.